Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos. Welcome back, listeners, to Humans Are Space Orcs, the premier podcast on human military tactics, history, and current events. I am your host, Speaker Karfantha, and it is my sworn duty to lead my fellow Shrali through the terrifying world of human combat. Now, normally, we'd continue our series on human monster soldiers, covering the human tribe chosen by the weekly comment poll. Our avid listeners will know what comes at the end of the month, though. Instead of our Soldier of the Week, we have to take a hiatus to host the most terrifying, nightmarish insectoid of all, my brood sister and host of Humans Do What, Speaker Trofarlor.
It's amazing how many times you've told that joke, Karnfa, and it has yet to be funny.
Listeners, thank your deity of choice that you are not in the studio with me. The horror is almost too much to ow!
I swear you get more immature with age. Listeners, what my larva of a brother is trying to say is it's our monthly dueling comment section episode. This is where we take the topics from our respective podcasts that didn't get voted into a feature-length show. It'll be up to you listening live to cast your votes on which we cover. These explanations cannot be as in-depth since we have limited time. We will, however, do our best to expand on your voted topics of choice.
As always, what we say cannot be used as medical, judicial, structural, or courting advice. The information is as accurate as we can get, but even we can miss things, misunderstand things, or get plain bamboozled.
Like that time you aired a segment on flying attack monkeys?
I wouldn't start throwing accusations. Or was the Shrali jeweler you interviewed correct about exactly where the humans put their marriage jewelry?
Fine. Let's not bring that up, please. I just ate.
I don't usually endorse my little sister's podcast, but all of my listeners need to find that one. It's a riot. What was it, episode 3? It was early. You'll know it when you find it.
Can we get back on topic, Karnfa?
Okay, untwist your antennae. So, our first pairing from the losing comment questions. In the Humans Do What corner, we have, are humans really half the size of a Shrali? In the Humans Are Space Orcs corner, which is the cooler corner, let's be real, we have American super soldiers. Comment section, get to voting. While you're picking the obviously better choice, we'll take a moment to hear about our episode's sponsor. Beckoning Service is the #1 shooter game on all mobile device platforms. Did you want to experience what it's like to be a warrior caste, taking down Craxian purgers from your next-generation walker mech? Beckoning Service will take you to the front lines of Brawl 4 from the safety of your nest. Enjoy stunning realistic combat simulations from aboard Shrali attack cruisers like the Queen's Wrath, expelling Craxian stalkers. Recent downloadable content even lets you operate as human troops, using their unique abilities like Adrenaline Rush and Mind Over Matter to overwhelm the Craxian horde. Beckoning Service is compatible with mobile, augmented, and virtual reality systems. Please check your hardware for the required specs. If you download Beckoning Service using the promo code SPACE-ORC-1337, you get 10% off, as well as free access to the human unit, Polish Special Forces. That promo code once again is SPACE-ORC-1337. Download Beckoning Service and defend the Shrali Commonwealth from the Craxian menace today. Now, let's check in on that vote. Well, that's no surprise. Oof! 83% of the vote going to American super soldiers. That's gotta sting, Trofa.
Hardly. Just you wait. My commenters will come out where it counts.
You go on believing that. So, Americans. Originally, this tribe comes from the continent known as North America, which they share with the Canadian tribe. In modern Terran Defense League politics, they lay claim to 3 worlds, a dozen dwarf planets, and several asteroid belts. They have a reputation for being one of the most aggressive and expansionist subset of humans. That aggression seems to bleed into their monster of choice. Unlike the Germans, who grow their monster wolf hybrids from scratch, Americans start with a standard human. Well, maybe not quite standard. The benefit of this approach is that they get to select the best of the best from their soldiers. The first step in making a super soldier is rigorously screening for mental and physical acumen. These individuals have passed tests, outperformed their peers, and otherwise stood out as a stellar example of human combat prowess. Now armed with a human with a confirmed eye for battle, the real fun begins. Humans, on a basic level, come with a lot of shortfalls. I think my dear sister recently did an episode on how, physically, our mammalian friends are leagues behind even the weakest castes. When I can outlift somebody, you know they're not exactly strong. Well, the Americans took exception to that. Surgical implants of high-density, vat-grown muscle fiber replaced their standard-issue gun show with an artillery show. If you ever see a human with a straight line of scar tissue running down the length of their arms, run! They've got the strength to punch through you, your friend, and your friend's broodmother. While the surgeons are in there, they also reinforce the bones. They use a bunch of titanium pins and inserts to make their skeleton next to indestructible. That's just the muscle. I contacted a friend of mine in the Shrawley Commonwealth Warriors Union. They managed to get their hands on an interview with a former American super soldier. I have that interview here, though the names have been changed for security reasons. Let's give it a listen, and while we do, Trofa has put the next poll in the comments, so cast your vote.
Thank you, sir, for speaking with me.
No, thank you, John Doe. Do you prefer John or...
Doesn't matter. I'll be changing it in editing.
Fair enough. So, your people should know what kind of institution you're aligning with.
I agree. Can you please explain what has happened to you?
I was selected to go through Project Rebirth. It's considered an honor, even though everybody calls the folks that come out Frankensteins. Should have been a clue, honestly.
Frankenstein?
Old Earth monster. Don't worry about it. First thing they do is open up your torso, from the collarbone to the pelvis. Before you ask, no, that's not lethal in a surgical setting. Doctors do it all the time for a lot of reasons. In this case, it's so they can start shuffling innards around. They took out my kidneys, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, adrenal gland, replaced them all with lab-grown biomachines I couldn't pronounce with a gun to my head. Now I can take a weird little cocktail in a needle and heal broken bones, ruptured organs, cuts, whatever. Hurts like a son of a, but I've walked away from landmines because of it. I can breathe in pretty well anything except straight vacuum. Then, if I need a boost, I can consciously activate my adrenaline response. Did that once to open up a tank. Had to replace a few teeth, but the doctors decided to have a bit of fun with that. Instead of standard molars, I've got serrated steel, modeled after a pit bull. Speaking of teeth, I don't need normal food. My body processes wood, grass, cartilages, some kinds of rock just as easily as a burger. I still need water, but I can get it from a lot of sources. Stagnant puddles, salt water, people.
Have you had to?
No, I've never had to, but I was ordered to. They called it an intimidation tactic, with the side benefit of not adversely affecting water rations. I can still taste it sometimes. Had to become a vegetarian just to stop triggering myself.
I'm sorry. I couldn't imagine being ordered to, drink another sentient.
If I'm being completely honest, that's the least of the atrocities I've done. The TDL turned us into monsters, and they used us like it. There's a planet, a whole damned planet, that warns their children about me. Don't badmouth the Defense League, or they'll send the Frankenstein after you. He'll burn down the village and eat the naughty... I'm going to cut the interview here. They go into a lot of boring stuff after that, and we only have so much time. So yeah, American Frankenstein monsters are humans stuffed to the gills with modified bioaugmetic technology. Pretty fearsome, eh?
Carfan, you are the most callous Shrali I have ever met. That human soldier was in distress.
Oh, grow a carapace, Trofa! These are the human warrior caste. They know what they're getting into.
I swear, I'll never understand why you decided to focus on the military.
Because it's awesome?
Not awesome enough, apparently. The votes are in, Karnfa. Care to read them for the viewers?
No way! Why do humans keep drawing Shrali smut beat out the Irish mermaids? Come on, comment section! Fish people! You could have learned about fish people! Any stragglers out there? Help us out!
The smut question has 93% of the vote. How many stragglers do you think there are?
Maybe my audience all went to grab a snack. You never know.
I could see your listeners getting bored with your nonsense and leaving, yes. Oh, look, some stragglers voted. We're up to 95% now. Do you want to keep waiting?
No.
Lovely. So, humans and their proclivity for making Shrali smut comes down to a few things. Firstly, they're a very imaginative and artistic species. Even the humans that don't create art for a living will often practice some sort of creative outlet for fun, or as a mental exercise. This doesn't always come out as visual art, of course. Many write stories, sing, play an instrument, design toys, or any number of other artistic endeavors. There are some who can take a block of wood and use a knife to shape it into almost anything one could imagine. As to why humans tend to put such imaginative exercises into such provocative subject matter, well, I have an excerpt from a longtime friend of the show, Professor Seshra's new book, The Kindest Monsters, on sale now. Where all female Shrali have the capacity to lay eggs and cultivate larvae, it is rare that the biological imperative causes a significant desire to do so. For a considerable portion of Shrali history, it was the duty of queen castes to maintain the population, as they can selectively create castes as needed. If the nest was under attack, the local queen would produce more warrior castes, for instance. Humans, however, don't approach their society quite so logistically. Humans, on average, always feel some sort of evolutionary directive to reproduce. Considering the noteworthy and varied threats their world presents them, this instinct is very understandable. It was less a matter of having the right types of humans available and more about having enough in general. There are caveats and proclivities that do not make the constant mating drive a blanket condition. Please see Chapter 69 for additional information on human reproductive practices and preferences. Excerpt from Humans, the Kindest Monsters by Professor Seshra Chini. With the human instinct for mating so continuous in their mind, it makes sense that so much of their art is related to the amorous. They even have a law of sorts called Rule 34, which states that if something exists, including imagined things, then a human has created smut out of it. While I can't profess that I fully understand how they've managed it, at least some humans have proven to be physically attracted to Shrali and vice versa. I personally find the mammals interesting, but I'd be hard-pressed to consider them anything more than that.
Ugh, you couldn't pay me enough credits.
You're the one who keeps going into extensive detail on human musculature, Karnfa.
You can admire a plasma lance projector without wanting to bring it back to your nest for these amorous ends of yours.
As if any human would give you the time of day. Anyway, did you put the next poll up while I was talking?
Sure did, and whoa, this is a close call. We have 48% for Can a Human Survive Without a Brain, and 52% for Canadians.
Should we cover both?
No way, my side won.
How are you older than me? Viewers, we'll explore the strange case of Phineas Gage and the human capacity for surviving severe brain trauma later.
Nerd. Okay, now for a real monster. So, remember the Americans? They have this reputation for being super aggressive and having this really intense military industry. Their soldiers have all the best gadgets, the best guns, carriers, railguns, plasma lance projectors, blah blah blah. So what about their neighbors to the north? Well, they're a bit of a paradox. See, the average Canadian has the galactic reputation of being, essentially, a nicer, more polite version of an American. There's a pretty common human joke about the best way to find the difference between the two is to bump into one. If they punch you, American. If they say sorry, Canadian. But their soldiers? Canadian soldiers are what happens when you're given an American, strip away all their toys, and plop them naked in a tundra. Then tell them to defeat the same armies they were going against when they had supercarriers as backup. That treatment really activates the whole born on the Deathworld part of their brains. My regular viewers will be familiar with the human event called World War I. This is where more or less every nation was involved in a single conflict, all the way across Earth. Mostly against the Germans and their allies. We've covered a bunch of the nations who participated, but have neglected the poor Canadians, mainly because they were technically a part of the British forces. They had a whole independence thing about it after, but it's not as fun to cover as how the Americans bucked imperial rule. Anyway, the Canadians, even as a subset of another power, were a little unhinged. They did things like tossing food to their starving enemies. How is that bad? Well, when the enemy asked for more, having taken down their anti-grenade netting and covers, the Canadians threw in grenades. Boom! During unofficial truces, many nations would fraternize with their counterparts across the battlefield. One such event was called the Christmas Truce, which centered around a fairly popular human religion. So while the Americans were playing games with the Germans, the British had tea, and the French surrendered more, the Canadians walked up, shook hands, and brought the knives out. They'd surrender, luring out dozens of the enemy, before opening up on them with machine gun fire. Also, you know how most nations took prisoners? Nope. They don't have the supplies for that, remember? They operated through all 3 world wars with a no prisoners mentality. The Canadians shared a polar expanse of ice and snow with Russia, who was a key player in the outset of World War III. So, the easiest way for Russia to attack the Americans was by lobbing very fast missiles over Canada after sneaking under this ice sheet with submersible weapon ships. Did the Canadians use advanced sonar, subaquatic defense platforms, or even some of those Irish mermaid warriors you guys didn't want to know about? No! They had bog-standard humans swim under the ice and plant bombs. They mined an ice sheet so thoroughly that if a submarine came up for air, let alone to launch a missile, it would explode before breaching the surface. They started calling them Canadian blowholes. What's more, some of these guys didn't even use scuba equipment. Something about the air tank creating too large of a sonar profile. They just held their breath, stripped to their underclothes, and took a quick dip beneath the ice. Now, you might have noticed I haven't said anything about augmetics, splicing, mech suits, or mutation vats. That's because the Canadians don't subscribe to any of that. They take a human and push the standard issue equipment they're born with to its limits. Those limits are apparently so damned scary, they inspired several rules the humans have written to keep themselves in check. The Geneva Convention is a document published after World War II, making most of the Canadians' go-to combat tactics illegal. Since, you know, the rest of humanity were big larvae about it. The Orion Accords, signed just before first contact with the Shra-Li, banned the new methods Canadians came up with when faced with cyborgs, super soldiers, and mutants. Apparently, you can turn an awful lot of modern technology into dirty electromagnetic pulse bombs, and it is not a pleasant experience to be around if you have a chip in your brain. I reached out to some of my contacts in the Warriors Union to see if they had any anecdotes to share. This is what he told me. So, John Doe, What can you tell me about the Canadians?
Canadians weaponized a chocolate bar. So many dead. The screams.
That is literally all I got out of him. He just stared into the middle distance for a while, started sobbing, and drank himself unconscious. You know, I'm with him on that one. If I had to face an augmented human ready to punch through my head, or a Canadian who was just handed a shoelace and is starting to get ideas, I'll take a nice clean punch through the head. I don't want to know where that shoelace is going, where it's coming out of, or what process is going on between those two events. Hey, Trofar, what did your nerd friend call her book?
The Kindest Monsters.
I think she may have been talking about Canadians. Anyway, that's all I have about the tundra monkeys. How'd the next poll go?
I really doubt that, Karnfa. As for the poll, it's another close one, but with 63% of the vote, Nepalese mushroom zombies beat out What is Curry and Why Did It Collapse the Shar 3 Economy? That's a shame. I had a whole segment on how tandoori masala replaced the Commonwealth credit as the local currency.
Well, apparently the audience just didn't have the fortitude to deal with a riveting topic like economics. It's all right, listeners. We'll keep matters tame with the militarized undead. So, Nepal was a pretty small country at the time this particular beast was dreamed up. Coming out of World War III, a significant portion of Nepal was under the control of the neighboring powers. Mostly, the remaining territory had two features: a few plateaus of arable farmland, and a really, really tall mountain. That mountain was some kind of tourist attraction before the war. Since humans are descended from climbing primates, they like to climb things, and this was literally the biggest thing on their planet. After the war, though, travel restrictions to the region made it a very tall rock that nobody was allowed to visit. Now, all those years of climbers left a mark on that mountain, a mark in the form of nearly 2 million frozen human bodies. Unfortunately, records from this time are pretty sketchy. Nobody is entirely sure where the fungus came from. Most rumors blame illegal bioweapon research facilities, while a number of contemporary scientists claim it was a fully natural mutation. But whatever the cause, one particularly warm day, those frozen climbers started coming down off the mountain. So, if a shambling horde of deceased Shrali began wandering through your local village, what would you do? Personally, I'd defecate out everything I'd eaten since my first molting, then preemptively dig my own grave. The humans of Nepal, though, they saw an opportunity. With a lot of careful experimentation, they managed to implant a sort of remote control in these animated climbers. Using subtle electrical signals and a very, very prolific vaccination program for the Nepalese people, this tiny country now had an army. An army that flat out didn't care if they lost arms, organs, or the very forces that kept them alive. By virtue of being absolutely terrifying and even more unstoppable than your average human, Nepal gained back all the territory it had surrendered in the war. They then created a buffer zone around their country, where these zombies just roamed in an endless circle as a deterrent to future invasion. That didn't last forever, of course. Even with a couple million bodies on ice at the top of the mountain, and throwing any post-living body they had access to into the mix, they ran out. Also, the technology and vaccine they developed around these zombies wasn't exactly super complex. Other countries figured it out too, and the military edge of Nepal had fallen away. They got to keep their reclaimed territory, though, because who wants to deal with people who decide to weaponize their deceased? Fun fact, the Canadians would stuff some of this fungus into an artillery round and fire it deep behind enemy lines. The resulting boom would remove some enemies from the board and then bring them back as mindless attack zombies. It's because of them that the whole zombie soldier thing was added to that Orion Accord we mentioned. I consider it another win for the kindest monsters.
I really don't think Canadians are why she called the book that.
Doesn't matter. Hey, listeners, sound off if you want a Kindest Monsters carapace decal with the Canadian flag in the merch store.
Well, I for one am glad the humans have decided not to use such an abominable weapon in the future.
Technically, the Orion Accord and the Geneva Convention only apply to human-on-human conflict. So far as the war on Craxians goes, every old trick is new again, and every atrocity is back on the table.
Listen, I'm not advocating going easy on the Craxians. The Queens know those lizards have done deplorable things. But a zombie fungus? Drinking their blood? Whatever fresh evil the Canadians can come up with? Nothing deserves to go through that.
Agree to disagree. I, for one, am staying prepared. I got this vial of that human zombie fungus off a friend who has a ticklish relationship with interstellar customs. If I ever meet a Craxian, I'm going to see how they enjoy this stuff shoved down their gullet.
If you ever meet a Craxian, I doubt you'll get the chance. This isn't that beckoning service shooter game. While I'm not terribly fond of your chosen subject matter, in the interest of not losing a sibling, perhaps avoid trying to test your mettle like that.
Killjoy! Anyway, let's take a look at the poll. With 73% of the vote, did a human really destroy a planet because of his dog beat out Japanese mech suits? You know, I can't even be mad about that. Hey, Trofa, did a human do that over their pet?
Depending on your perspective, I suppose I have to disappoint. No, a single human did not, in fact, destroy a planet to avenge his fallen canine companion. This is a plot to the remake of a human film franchise. It does involve a retired super soldier who suffers the loss of their dog. That spurs them to fight their way to the top of a massive organization of shadowy assassins. It ends with them toppling a planetary regime, though not the destruction of a whole planet. A bit violent for my taste, but it does have an odd kernel of truth in it. See, one of the things that almost everybody has heard about is the human habit of pack bonding. They'll form strong emotional bonds with anything, anyone, and whatever doesn't fall into those two categories, especially with the small creatures known as pets, which they often care for with as much fervor as their own spawn. With the absolute and terrifying extremes that humans will reach to defend their spawn, a pet might enjoy similar protection, particularly as in the case with the film, that pet is a gift from a lost loved one. On a recent trip to Trimar Prime, I spoke to several survivors of a horrific cargo hauler crash. Not every interview I held made it into that episode, but the following excerpt explains my point regarding pets. For brevity, I've edited out most of our chat. You are a very brave woman, Hural. Thank you for saying, but I pretty much just kept my head enough to run in the right direction. Some of the humans were truly fearless. Some of their emergency workers had these small quadrupeds called dogs they used to help sniff out survivors. I watched one of these dogs catch a scent and rush off into a building about to collapse. Their human ran after them without question. Did they get out all right? Kind of. The building did collapse, and it took other rescue services nearly an hour to dig them out. The human held more than 300 kilos of debris off their dog for the entire time. He probably could have left the dog to die and crawled out, but he stuck it out for this animal. See? Such amazing dedication. So, if you come across a human with a small animal, do your best not to harm it. Your actions may not end in a regime-toppling crusade, but why take the chance?
I can't believe you managed to make that sound boring. You have a real talent, Trofa. While you were making an action film seem dull, I put up our last poll. Between what is a gym bro and why are they so feared and human trolley cyborg. We have cyborgs with 57%. Ha! Oh, and do I have a treat for you, lucky listeners? Through a source that has requested to remain anonymous, I have gotten my manipulators on the diary entry of a leading scientist working directly with the Human Trolley Alliance. Galactic Census Date 02-08-036-37.85. Translated to Terran. Common. English subtype. Log. Engineer 3rd Class Tash-O Gra-Araha. You've killed her! I couldn't think of anything else to say after looking at the chart in my claws. The subject, this Barbara M. Chander, had been submitted for one of the first programs of the newly minted Human-Shrali Alliance. It was something of a technology exchange, as our peoples developed along vastly divergent engineering paths. We would work together, my human counterpart and I, to make a new weapons platform. I was surprised when the delegates welcomed me aboard this station and brought me to what was clearly a hospital. White walls, tall enough ceiling to accommodate my greater height, and more, the smell of sterile metal. Now I sat in what had become my office over the past weeks, desk riddled with electroplastic tablets. When the Shrali government contacted me, I thought we'd be making mobile tactical suits. My people's exoskeleton enhancement armament was one of the few fields of war we held superior ground to the Craxians. To me, mechanized warfare equipment and science acted as old friends. It seemed I was correct for a while. Of course, the mechanisms took on a more bipedal shape as opposed to the standard quadruped. Humans were like that. They'd want to pilot something familiar. I worked with a surgeon, not a fellow engineer. That's understandable. My designs would be required to work with human physiology in mind. Why did internal mechanisms need to be compatible with iron-based oxidizing biofluid? Maybe an emergency life support system? The very extensive neural interface suite was harder to reason away, as was the amount of time my colleague spent preparing his surgical theater. I suspected the truth of it, but it wasn't until the surgeries began that I let the truth settle around me. I was an engineer, a leader in my field. Now these humans made me into a murderer. She's not dead, Tash. My human doctor, Mohammed Smith, pat me reassuringly on my carapace. Neither the assurances nor contact from the small mammal did anything to assuage my concerns. She was supposed to be a pilot, not... My words failed, as I couldn't find a Shrali common word for what we'd done. Instead, I tossed the chart away, paced the wide office, decorated with schematics and assembly drawings, each one familiar, and now twisted into a profane purpose. This should have been easy. Come in, teach these soft-skinned creatures how to properly design a shell to operate inside. Shrali mechanized units formed the backbone of the Shrali-Craxian War to even the playing field on the front lines. Humans still used tanks for Seshalid's sake. In a sense, she is a pilot, he shrugged, turning in his chair to follow me as I walked back and forth. We're all just little blobs of electrified fatty tissue piloting a robot made of blood, bone, and assorted organs. His cavalier take on what we'd done agitated me more. She's a monster! A calm voice answered my outbursts, tinged with an undertone of static.
I couldn't agree more.
Slowly, I turned to find Barbara standing in the doorway leading to the operating theater. She looked human, in the abstract sense. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. The extremities, though, bore what was clearly my design for ablative carapace, placed over high-density myomer meant to lift 2.3-ton mechanized walker limbs. Her insides glowed softly under the sternum, where Dr. Smith hadn't yet affixed polytitanium armor to protect the fusion core. Her gaze held me, paralyzed in place. She looked down on me, which in and of itself was startling. I've been looking down at my coworkers ever since I boarded the cursed space station. This creature, my creature, would be hard-pressed to find any but the most overgrown of Craxians to meet at eye level. While the height difference startled, the eyes pierced me. They were cold, impassive, assessing. I was aware they held the sensor suites that let her pinpoint my vital organs, detect incoming fire and artillery, or search buildings at a glance. Thermal scanners, electrostatic detectors, LiDAR, and a host of other more bizarre sensors crammed into her head. How she looked at me with those pitiless voids. Without question, I knew she saw my soul and was calmly deciding how best to remove it. "Miss Chander," Dr. Smith said in greeting. His cavalier attitude vanished, replaced with something else. I'd have guessed fear, but it would seem I had a monopoly on that emotion at the moment. The doctor stepped between us, craning his neck to gaze into those terrifying eyes. "How are you feeling?"
"Like my outsides finally match my insides,"
she said, raising a hand, inspecting the fingers decorated with plasma lance projectors. I don't know what unsettled me more, that she thought this desecration befit her, or that I believed her. "Good. Please send in the next volunteer." I felt my stomachs drop as Barbara turned and left us. "We're doing this to more of them?" I hissed, disgust warring with rage. "We aren't doing this to them," he returned, calm like the thing that just stomped away. "There are 23 volunteers waiting for this process. All of them are survivors from the Red Cross deployment on Bral 4. All of them were healers, and all of them died there in a way that, frankly, I don't think you comprehend." The tone of his voice, what I briefly mistook for fear, it clicked. It was sorrow and anger in equal measures. "We're doing this for them. They asked us for this, to take away their humanity and replace it with..." It was his turn to lose words, to search for some parable or reasoning to make me understand the gravity of our work. They needed to have something that could stop anyone from hurting others like that again. "We're making demons," I whispered. "You'll find there is a very fine line between demons and angels." He held me then, letting his warmth bleed through my carapace. We stayed that way a while, before he backed away, the facade of an affable smile on his face. "So, why don't you prime up the polytype printers while I go over the pre-surgery checks?" I did as instructed. I was an engineer. Now I make demons.